society, your economics, your pocket, your voting choices. That's what we talk about, the stuff that shape our democracy. We're starting with fresh off the press. The Democratic Alliance, Mpho Phalatse, has been ousted as the mayor of the city of Johannesburg yesterday, and Thapelo Ahmed of Al Jamaah has been voted in as the new mayor. Al Jamaah has 3 seats in the city of Johannesburg Council. You have got to love democracy. A party with 3 seats is able to produce a mayor. That is the function of democracy. It again goes to show that there are no big parties, no small parties, that there are parties, that there are representatives, and everybody stands, or at least democratically should stand, an equal and fair chance of being able to vote it in as mayor, speaker, whatever the case may be. But the Democratic Alliance is once again at the center of what is considered a failed municipality. Are they to be blamed? Many people blame them. Gayton McKenzie, the leader of the Patriotic Alliance, that orchestrated in many ways the coalition shift in the city of Johannesburg. The Democratic Alliance has been blamed by Gayton McKenzie as having been arrogant and not wanting to come to the defense of Mpho Phalatse. He argues that it's rooted in racist chauvinism, that if it were Tanya Campbell, the Democratic Alliance would have pulled out all stops and made early concessions to be able to keep her in power. That with Mpho Phalatse, they did not want to make those concessions until the very last minute, when they realize that the power dynamics have shifted. Is there any truth to this at all? I'll be discussing that in a very short while with the national spokesperson of the Democratic Alliance, Silas Brink. A gentleman in Swaziland has been killed, Thulani Maseko. Once again brings into stark contrast and stark consideration democracy and the pro-democracy movements in Swaziland at the behest, or at least being thwarted under the authoritarian rule of King Mswati as the ultimate monarch of the country. Will Swaziland ever reach any democracy, and what is the state of affairs at the moment in the country? I'm going to be having that conversation as well. But let's take a quick break. On the other side of this, I speak to Silas Brink.
This Week Today, Fridays, 6 to 7 p.m.
You can be a part of this conversation. I'm taking your reactions to all of them. 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial. 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial. Give us a call. If you want to send us a WhatsApp voice note, 0614 104 107. 0614 104 107. The show has also been streamed live on all our digital platforms. You can watch this live on our YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter platforms if you'd like to see my face and the faces of the guests that we have on the show this evening. Do remember to keep those voice notes under a minute and switch off the radio when you record the voice note. Otherwise, Lisa just wouldn't play it. She calls it unhygienic. So to get it onto the air, just switch off the radio and keep it under a minute. Silas Brink, the national spokesperson of the Democratic Alliance, is with me. Silas, good evening. Thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Let's start with the chief accusation meted out by the Patriotic Alliance, that the Democratic Alliance is to be blamed for the collapse of governance in the city of Johannesburg. What's your reaction to that?
If you could just permit me to give you just a bit of an analysis of what's going on there. You mentioned before that, Thapelo Ahmed being a councillor of Al Jamaah, a party with 3 seats in a 270-seat council, being elected executive mayor. It shows how wonderful democracy is. But the truth is that executive mayor Ahmed is a placeholder. He has no agenda or power of his own. He is a stooge for the ANC. He will be accountable to many puppet masters, and we believe and we fear that the consequences is going to be devastating for Johannesburg. We saw the same model happening in Nelson Mandela Bay in 2018 after Athol Trollip was removed. The thing is that the ANC and the EFF don't want to openly go into a coalition, especially the EFF, because they know that their voters reject the ANC. So they need a cover. They need somebody to facilitate a coalition so that they don't have to put it on the books. And what's really damaging about this coalition, before I get to answering your question, is that we won't get to see the terms and conditions of that coalition agreement. When the multi-party coalition government in Joburg was established, it was a process of negotiations. The coalition agreement was published, was made known. This is the division of positions between parties. We don't know what is in that coalition agreement between Al Jamaah, the ANC, the EFF, and the Patriotic Alliance. And we fear that the terms and conditions go beyond just responsibilities for service delivery. We do fear that this will be a battle over resources. Now, to get to your question, as you know, the Patriotic Alliance was brought into the multi-party coalition in Joburg last year. They signed the coalition agreement. Obviously, we wanted to stabilize the coalition because we didn't have a majority as a coalition. The parties in the coalition didn't have that 50 plus 1% in order to protect it against these motions of no confidence, pass a budget, get loans, and so forth. The Patriotic Alliance was brought on board. They were given a position in the mayoral committee, various other positions in other coalition governments. And then at a crucial time when Mpho Phalatse was under threat by the ANC, the Patriotic Alliance held the gun against our head and said they wanted positions. So that led to the collapse of that arrangement. And then the Patriotic Alliance came back through Action SA. They wanted to return to the coalition government, and we said, fine, we have very serious reservations about that, but let's talk. And that led to 2 weeks of negotiation, a back and forth. It wasn't just us saying, this is our position, we refuse anything else. It was rounds and rounds of offers and counter offers in which the DA was perfectly willing to make concessions, but we had to have conditions. We couldn't just give the Patriotic Alliance everything they wanted, because that would have compromised the integrity of the coalition government and the integrity of our offering. And so they walked away from the coalition agreements. We now suspect, and this is just my final word in answer to your question, we now suspect that Gayton McKenzie has been stringing along the DA and the other parties all along. We believe that this coalition agreement with the ANC was locked and loaded weeks ago, and that all he was doing was playing off offers against the ANC, and then eventually just using Action SA in particular to attack the DA. So it's a very sad day for Joburg. I really don't think it's a wonderful turn for democracy.
So, Elias, what did the Patriotic Alliance ask? What are the positions they asked for, and other terms that they asked for from the Democratic Alliance that the party was under the impression would collapse the integrity of the coalition agreement?
So let me just start with the conditions that we went into in the coalition, the framework from which we negotiated, and I'll get to that. And our condition was basically two items, two conditions. The first was we didn't want to place the Patriotic Alliance in a significantly stronger position than they were before they betrayed us and went with the ANC. And that's an important, not just a matter of principle, it's also a matter of practicality. Once you reward betrayal in the past, you virtually guarantee future betrayal. We would have been stuck in this sort of, extortative politics for the next however many years until the end of the term. The second point is we did not want to entrust departments that are especially prone or vulnerable to patronage politics to the Patriotic Alliance, simply because of the things that the Patriotic Alliance have said about themselves. I mean, Gayton McKenzie is quite clear. He says he doesn't care about principles. He's in it for maximizing positions. And especially economic development. So let's get into the details. They demanded economic development, which is a portfolio that includes the Joburg property market, property company. Sorry, it's been a long day. The Joburg fresh produce market and various other entities.
Yeah.
And a Patriotic Alliance councillor had held that portfolio before under the ANC coalition that was in place in Joburg. And that councillor had been fired by the ANC mayor and accused of interfering in processes and collapsing the divide between party and state. Now, of course, you can accuse the ANC of the same thing, but it's clear that the Patriotic Alliance's deal with the ANC soured over a battle of resources in economic development. And what we said is we don't want that thing to be replicated under a multi-party coalition, under a DA mayor, because it's not Action SA or the Patriotic Alliance that will be blamed if there is spectacular corruption and failure in economic development. It will be Mayor Mpho Phalatse that gets blamed. So we had a responsibility to say, we will agree to certain concessions, and we can go into the details of what we offered in the different phases.
What did you offer?
So initially, we offered the speaker to Action SA so that Action SA could give one of their mayoral committee positions to the Patriotic Alliance. We also offered them a committee chairpersonship of the DA, plus then a seat on the mayoral committee, essentially the position they were in before their betrayal to the ANC last year.
Which was economic development?
No, not economic development. As I said, our condition was not economic development.
Okay, so what was the mayoral committee seat that you offered?
The remaining one that Action SA held was transport, but that was phase one of the negotiations. They then rejected that. Then we came with a counter offer. And finally, we were even willing to offer the Patriotic Alliance seats in the Ekurhuleni coalition government, 2 seats, 2 mayoral committee seats in Ekurhuleni, one in Joburg, provided it's not economic development. And so, I mean, this idea that we were, rigid and refused to give up position, it's absolutely not true. And, if you really want the details, we've released now the letters that John Steenhuisen wrote to the coalition partners at different phases of the negotiations that clearly set out our concerns. We're not making this stuff up after the fact. There you've got contemporaneous notes that track the progress of the negotiations. And we didn't release those letters before the end of the negotiations. We didn't speak to the media before the end of the negotiations. The Patriotic Alliance had an opportunity to accept that, even at the last minute, but quite frankly, they aren't interested in a program of action service delivery. That now, I mean, Gayton McKenzie's got many things to say about Mpho Phalatse now and how the DA didn't protect her. But why did he not vote for her? Why did he not support her? And the fact is, he doesn't care about her. Gayton McKenzie doesn't care about service delivery. He doesn't care about Mayor Mpho Phalatse. He just cares about his own pocket, quite frankly. And I think the people of Joburg, especially the folks that voted for the Patriotic Alliance, must now realize that the extent to which they have treated those voters as tradable commodities.
So the Democratic Alliance offered everything the kitchen sink except for economic development. Am I understanding that correct?
No, certainly. No. I mean, to say we offered everything in the kitchen sink would be an exaggeration. Let's not, get into we offered a reasonable position. We didn't want them to have economic development, given their track record in economic development and given the vulnerability of economic development to the kind of patronage politics that Gayton McKenzie openly says that he stands for.
Consider the following calculus. The Democratic Alliance gives up economic development, retains the mayoral seat, and continues to control the purse of the city of Johannesburg. That's one scenario. The other scenarios, the Democratic Alliance does not give up economic development, loses the mayoral seat, and loses control over the purse of the city of Joburg, which is significantly more money than merely having control over various markets, a property company, and various agencies within the city of Johannesburg. You're leaving then the people of the city of Johannesburg. If you truly believe that, if you truly believe that the Democratic Alliance is the party that has the best interest of the residents of Johannesburg at heart, surely then the argument and calculation should have been, how do we retain the most pivotal seat in the city, which is the mayoral seat, even if it means that we may leave economic development vulnerable by your own argument. By your own calculation, don't you think that your unwillingness to concede economic development has now left the residents of the city of Joburg more vulnerable?
Right. So in the first instance, you're assuming that the Patriotic Alliance was negotiating in good faith. So you're buying the story that if we just agreed to that, they would have supported us. The indications are that they've been doing this deal with the ANC even as they were talking to us. And that's perfectly in line with their behavior.
Is it then your belief that they lied?
Absolutely. This is a dishonest bunch, and I think it's been proved over and over again. But let me answer the question. If we had conceded economic development, we would have placed ourselves in a weakened position. We would have weakened the coalition from the inside, opened up coalition government to the type of ANC patronage politics, the mismanagement that had characterized the ANC's time in office. We would far rather be in opposition where we can go guns blazing against this form of conduct. We can expose it, than in our own midst have this type of patronage politics and abuse. It will completely compromise our brand. It completely compromises the integrity of the coalition that we lead. There's a certain price beyond which you don't stay in power. You rather return to opposition because you can play a more effective role. And that was the calculation.
Okay.
I think that the time will show. All of these parties that are now in this mad coalition with a 3% party holding they are going to end up fighting over resources. It's going to be Nelson Mandela Bay 2018 all over again. And it's crucially important that people understand that if councillors and parties were elected on a ticket to provide an alternative to the ANC, but then bring the ANC back to power, they can't blame anybody else. They've got to take accountability themselves. And that's certainly the message that we will be delivering. We will be delivering to the people of Eldos, Westbury, Riverlea, who voted for the Patriotic Alliance and were sold out.
Let's move on to what I would like to call the normative discussion about coalition politics. Coalition politics at a basic level, Silas, and I think you would agree with me, requires a level of trust. Where there's no trust amongst the coalition partners, there is no partnership. It will certainly inevitably fall apart. There certainly is, a breach of trust between the Democratic Alliance and the Patriotic Alliance in particular, and it seems irreconcilable at this stage. What does this mean for the DA's relationship as far as open and willingness to negotiate with the PA in other municipalities across the country?
We've tried it all over. We tried it in the Western Cape, in Knysna, Theewaterskloof, Cedarburg, all of these places. The Patriotic Alliance followed the same approach, same as in Joburg. They'll get a deal from the DA and our coalition partners. They'll wait for things to settle down. They'll take that deal to the ANC, try to get a better deal, bring it back to us and say, oh, if you can't match the ANC's deal, we'll bring your government to a fall. And by the way, we'll say terrible things about you. We'll call you racist. We'll, all sorts of nasty rhetoric. And that is a pattern of behavior. It's not just one isolated incident. In Joburg, this is the last straw. We gave the Patriotic Alliance opportunity after opportunity to show good faith, to come back to the bargaining table. You're quite right. I mean, trust is important in coalition politics. But trust is also a matter of how much trust. Certain parties you can trust to a certain extent. Other parties it's not an absolute. And we were willing to give the Patriotic Alliance in Joburg the opportunity to win back some of the trust that they destroyed with their conduct. And they've just, as far as the Patriotic Alliance is concerned, the DA is not interested. I mean, they practically in the same column as the EFF was.
Give us a call, 086 000 2032. I'm taking your reaction to this. 086 000 2032. Just a final question from me before I take some callers, Silas. Can the DA continue to persist a coalition engagement framework where it has hard lines, such as certain portfolios which we think are vulnerable to patronage should never go to any of the other coalition partners? Economic development is the example here. Hold on. Economic development is the example here.
We never said... Yeah, so I just want to correct the premise of the question. We never said that doesn't go to the other parties. We were perfectly willing to have Action SA deal with economic development. We were also perfectly willing to have the Freedom Front Plus deal with economic development. We didn't want that portfolio. We just didn't trust the Patriotic Alliance with that portfolio. So I just had to correct the premise of your question.
Right. And what was the response from Gayton McKenzie to saying, hey, why not have Action SA take that portfolio? And then they would take one of the other Action SA portfolios.
He rejected that.
What did Action SA say when you presented this deal?
Action SA was largely in favor of everything that the Patriotic Alliance put on the table. So, basically, at the outset of it, the Action SA told us, you must just accept everything the Patriotic Alliance puts on the table. And we simply couldn't do that. As we say, we don't negotiate with a gun held to our heads.
Just for clarity, you offered them 2 seats in Ekurhuleni. What were those seats?
Off the top of my head, I think it was city planning, and I can't quite remember the other one. But what's important is all of this information is in the correspondence released by the DA, where we confirmed what was going on throughout the negotiations. I simply don't have that off the top of my head now.
Yeah. What happens, Silius, in the next election? The Democratic Alliance still doesn't get a 50+1 majority in the city and has to go back to the negotiating table. Are you at all going to make an attempt at negotiating for the mayoral seat, or just because the PA is in the mix, step away from it all and take the opposition benches?
So unfortunately, I interrupted you while you were asking I think a very important question. And let me just touch on that before I get to Joburg specifically. The future of coalitions, the way that we do coalitions, there's about 38, 39 coalitions that the DA is a part of across the country. The vast majority of those coalitions are stable and successful. We follow exactly the same approach in those coalitions that we did in Johannesburg. Unfortunately, the stakes are just so very high in Joburg because, these portfolios offer lucrative opportunities for patronage politics, quite frankly. Coalition governments aren't easy. They are very difficult. They require compromise. They require attempts to build trust and to focus on service delivery. But in the most instances, we've got it right. In most of these coalitions, we've been successful. So it's important that people don't lose faith in the type of coalition governments that are openly negotiated, where the public have access to what's in the coalition agreement. We can still make coalitions work. As for Joburg, we are going to ask the people of Joburg for the biggest mandate possible at the next election. And the message is going to be clear. The more parties that you have in a coalition agreement, the more difficult it becomes to sustain stability and a focus on service delivery. If you are stuck negotiating and renegotiating which party gets which portfolio, how to perfect your power sharing arrangement every 6 months, then you are not going to get time for the stuff that really matters, the projects, the programs that take time to build up, holding officials to account. It is an absolute recipe of failure to have 9, 10 parties in a coalition. And our message to the people of Joburg and elsewhere would be very careful in casting your vote, because coalitions can very easily turn into chaos.
Let's take some calls. Mzwandile out in Port Elizabeth in Gqeberha. Good evening.
Hi, Oliver. Listen, man, I've got 2 questions. Your guest there, he's saying they did not trust the Patriotic Alliance. Based on what? What is it that they did not trust? I mean, all these are new parties, so there's no behavior that they have omitted yet that we've picked up in the public that would then put them as the DA in a position to judge them and say, no, based on the following reasons, we don't trust these people. What are those reasons?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah.
Yes. Secondly, look, the largest voting bloc of the DA are black people. Let's just be frank about it. Ne? I'm yet to have the DA produce a plan where they say these are our deliverables for black people, especially in townships, meaning this is the development plan that we have as the DA. No, we know service delivery is a by the way. They must now produce a plan for the black voter in the township to say, this is what we think of you, and this is the plan that they've never produced that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for that. Really do appreciate it. Silius, I don't know if you heard the question, but the first question was, what is the evidentiary basis upon which you have distrust in the Patriotic Alliance, specifically pertaining to economic development? I know earlier you said that during the ANC coalition, they had charge of that portfolio and royally messed it up. What exactly did they do?
So they were fired. The Patriotic Alliance MMC for Economic Development was fired, and the ANC mayor who fired him said that he had improperly interfered in processes and that he had disrespected the divide between party and state. Now, you could well say that's rich coming from the ANC, but there was a clear indication that a turf war over resources had broken out between the ANC and the Patriotic Alliance. And that had very negative consequences for the management of that portfolio. We did not want a rerun of that. We did not want people being placed on suspension, tenders to be stopped, all manner of things that had happened during the tenure of the Patriotic Alliance in economic development in the ANC era. That's one aspect. The other aspect, and I apologize if I have to reiterate this just to answer the question, is what Gayton McKenzie says about his own approach to politics. Over the negotiating table, when we say principles, program of action, service delivery, he says, I'm not interested in any of that. I want you to give me the best deal for me. He doesn't come with demands for capital projects in areas where the Patriotic Alliance got votes. He doesn't say, money must go to Aldo's or Rivoli. We must have these projects. It's about jobs for Patriotic Alliance politicians. He wants to broaden his network of influence, and he's quite shameless about that. Okay. And so having all of this knowledge must inform you of what position to take so that you don't compromise the integrity of your own coalition, especially if you're the party that has the mayor, because the mayor gets blamed for these things.
Just a quick one. The councillor that the Patriotic Alliance put forward for economic development, MMC, is it the same councillor in the previous administration that they had put forward?
There was no names being put forward in these negotiations. It would be up to the party to decide. So the negotiations happens in terms of party. So we'll divide portfolios to a party. The party then sends. We didn't get into individuals, but I tell you, it didn't really make a difference because it's the approach of the Patriotic Alliance. That's the point.
Pumzile in Humansdorp. Good evening.
Can I answer the second question?
Just a sec. I just want to take a few more calls and we'll circle back to that one. Pumzile, go ahead.
Sure.
Good evening, Oliver. Quickly, Oliver. You see, the problem with the DA is arrogance with numbers. In the coalition, you are all equal, irrespective of whether you have 40 and the others have got 2 and 1. You are all equal. That arrogance with the DA goes with obsession with power, as well as the bulliness, in fact. In any coalition, you hear them saying DA-led coalition. There is never such. A coalition is a coalition. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Pumzile. Nigel in Durban, good evening.
Good evening, Oliver. Thank you for taking my call. Oliver, about the loss of the mayorship by the DA, I remember this morning, in your program this morning, a listener phoned in to say that, after your analysis then of what happened, a listener phoned to say that you've been critical of the DA and therefore violated SAfm's commitment to independence and impartiality. Well, the listener obviously misunderstood that claim applies to news bulletins. Presenters are, of course, perfectly entitled to express a political view as part of the discussion. And you're not representing the SAfm and doing so. You're representing yourself. Am I right in all this?
Yes.
Good. Thanks, Oliver.
That's it. Thanks, Nigel. Really appreciate it. Pule in Matlosana, good evening.
Yes, how are you?
I'm well, sir. Go ahead.
Compliments, man.
Thank you so much.
Look, very, very brief. I said to Kesim Shafana and Stephen Fortes one day, coalition is not the future of this country because it's disruptive, it's flip-floppy, it's not servicing the people of South Africa very well. Let me tell you why I'm saying this. I said it briefly. Now there's a new mayor. He's coming with a financial plan. New plan to service the people of Johannesburg, of Gauteng. It's a disruptive. They have to start all together from scratch. There's no progress. South Africa must vote one party. Whether they vote DA, whether they vote EFF, whether they vote ANC to government, let it be like that. Imagine, briefly, in a national government, we have a coalition government.
Yeah.
In 5 years, we'll have 7 presidents. In 7 years. In 5 years, we'll have 7 presidents. And you know what you'll do will cost South Africa a lot of money, because once you're a president, you go away with your salary, with your blue lights. If you go to that level. So I'm saying, even in national, if they remove ANC, let them vote DA into power, let them vote EFF into power, no coalition, because we left 7 presidents.
Maybe just for a second, I wanna put this to you, and then maybe you can give me your reflection on it. The vast majority of coalitions in South Africa remain stable and see the coalition agreement to the end of term. It is only but in these instances of the city of Ekurhuleni, the city of Johannesburg, and Nelson Mandela Bay, where we've seen spectacular collapse as well, and Mogale. But Mogale is not quite a city. It's still a municipality. It's not a metro. But nonetheless, we've seen that sort of collapse over there in Mogale city as well. But the vast majority of coalition governments remain stable. Do you still then hold the view that coalitions are disruptive, given statistically it's the other way?
In the small towns, it works. When you go to the economical hub of the country, it's a disruptive. It's not working.
Okay.
When you go to a small city where DA is successful, it's a small of members of in a municipality that has 30 seats, 20 seats. But in the economical hub of South Africa, it's not working.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate it, Pule. Really do appreciate that. 2 questions. The first question, before you circle back to the other question, which I want to reframe before you answer it. The first question I have here, will Mpho Phalatse remain a councillor in the city of Johannesburg, to your understanding?
Well, that would be a decision for her to make. Obviously, she is now a leader of some political significance with a provincial, if not a national profile. So it would be up to her to decide where she will serve best. I can't speak on her behalf, but it obviously very often happens when a mayor is removed that they consider, perhaps parliament or provincial legislature. But let me not speculate on what her next moves are going to be.
So, to circle back to the earlier question that was asked by our caller earlier from Qabecha, does the Democratic Alliance have a plan of action that specifically speaks to the narrow, and by narrow I mean its specificity and its uniqueness, to the conditions that the black majority of South Africans find itself in, given that the vast majority of the Democratic Alliance voter base numerically have got to be black people, right? Assuming that all white people in the party voted for the DA, it still would not be enough to account for more than half of the votes that the DA receives. But we're being speculative here, but what is a statistical certainty is that the vast majority of the DA's voters are black. I interviewed John Steenhuisen last week. Two questions to which he answered. The first, he said the Democratic Alliance does not subscribe to race-based affirmative action or affirmative action at all, and the Democratic Alliance does not subscribe to BEE in particular. What then is the Democratic Alliance on the view of the specificity of dealing with the narrow issues of black people, given that there are continuous accusations of Mayor Tanya Campbell, for instance, not wanting to go into townships and face the problems that people are, when townships are burning, she doesn't want to go there. But as soon as it happens in suburbia or in towns, then she's on the scene and ready to deal with the situation. And there is evidence to that fact that she took days, for instance, to go into Tembisa when it was in disarray. And she said, I'll get there when I get there. Importantly then, there is a genuine fear by black voters who may not want to vote ANC but are skeptical of the DA about whether or not the DA will have the true interest of black people at heart, and it limits itself in that sense. Padding onto that, how the DA seemingly has a high turnover when it comes to black leaders at the top, either in provinces or nationally. The DA is unable to sustain black leaders, and at one point a DA veteran called them failed experiments. All of these things leaves a sour taste in the mouths of black voters, and many rightfully are skeptical of the DA's commitment to undoing racism. Does the DA have such a commitment, and how does it act it out?
So first of all, I think it's important to say that the DA believes in a common good. We don't segment by race, but you can certainly segment by economic circumstances. And if you look at townships, for example, the best thing that any government can do from a developmental perspective is to ensure a reliable supply of basic services, reliable supply of electricity, water, roads being maintained, waste being collected. That is how you make the lives of the poor better, enabling them to take the steps up the ladder of social mobility. You look at the Western Cape consistently, Cape Town included, the access to basic services by the poorest of the poor is the highest in the country. And that is not a coincidence. It is not something in the water or the weather or some legacy of what happens in the Western Cape. It is because of good, accountable government that cares about the ordinary circumstances of people. And that is what Mpho Phalatse tried to replicate in Johannesburg, and Randall Williams in Tshwane, and Tanya Campbell, despite all of these accusations against her, in Ekurhuleni. And if that is done, then the majority of black people, but more broadly, the majority of people who live in circumstances that are not ideal, that require to be lifted out of poverty and into the middle class, will have an easier opportunity of doing so. It's about creating the enabling conditions. We should all aspire to the standards of accountability and basic services that are in the Western Cape. And the Western Cape, of course, has been governed by the DA for a long period of time. Now, let me get to a redress policy. The DA certainly doesn't just say we reject BEE and then leave it at that. The party was at pains to develop alternative policy, and I would encourage you to invite my colleague Gwen Ngwenya, the DA's head of policy, if you want to have a dedicated discussion on redress.
Oh, my goodness. Unfortunately, we've lost Brink, Asilius Brink over there. Our Zoom has come to an end. Let's see if we can get him onto the telephone line so he can conclude that thought of his. That's quite unfortunate. 086 000 2032. 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial if you would like to be a part of this conversation. Let's take a quick break. On the other side of this, we continue.
SAfm has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Under the code, we are committed to giving news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that is not harmful, does not amount to hate speech, or contain violence or explicit sex. If you think we are not living up to that code, then you can inform the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Direct any complaints in writing to the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. PO Box 142365. Craig Hall 2024. Fax to 011-326-3198 or an email to bccsa@nabsa.co.za. For more information, please visit www.bccsa.co.za. At SAfm Radio and at Oliver_speaking on Twitter.
We have Silius back on the line. Silius, you were completing your last thought there before our Zoom link died on us. Yeah, take it away.
Thanks for allowing me to complete it. As I said, I think I would really encourage a dedicated discussion on this with Gwen Ngwenya, the DA's head of policy. What we did is we came up with the economic justice policy, which in essence is our alternative to race-based policy. And I think it responds to the weaknesses of BEE as it has been conceived of by the ANC, and that is principally that it enriches the same people over and over again and neglects the developmental goals of the underclass and the lower middle class. And it does so by looking at people's socioeconomic conditions instead of the color of their skin. And this also avoids this inane distinction between black African and colored African and Indian and so forth, this apartheid era sub-racial classification, which is constitutionally problematic, but also not a precise measure of what people actually experience and their socioeconomic conditions. That's a framework within which we can develop alternative policy. The point is, we do need an alternative. We need, for a party like the DA, not just to simply support the ANC's program of action, which to a large extent has failed. We have to come up with an alternative. Now, if you don't like our alternative ideas or you want us to adjust those, let's have that discussion. But to suggest that the DA doesn't care, that we simply, we have no interest in redress, We've no interest in economic realities, in social mobility. That's simply not true. We've dedicated a great deal of time and thought and effort to crafting that policy.
Thank you so much, Celius Brink. Really do appreciate your time this evening here on The Talking Point. Let's take a quick breather. On the other side of this, we speak to Mark Haywood from Maverick Citizen. He's the editor there. We speak about the death of human rights lawyer in Swaziland, Thulani Maseko.
Good evening, Mr. Oliver and SAfm listeners. This is Sondisa Palindula from the Eastern Cape. You know, these political parties, they are taking us for fools. I mean, like, I don't understand this thing of coalition. We can have the mayor who's going to last 2 months, then 3 months they're going to appoint another one. Tell me, there's something that I wanted to know. What about the benefits? I mean, maybe this guy is going to be a mayor for 2 months or 1 month. Then is he not going to be eligible to get the benefits as a former mayor? Are they not wasting taxpayers' money with these benefits of these 1,000 mayors that they are having in a period of 1 year? Thanks, bye.
Good evening, Oliver. A lot of people late last year, they were saying collusion is a way to go. But what happened in Joburg proved them wrong. They must think again. It
is 10 minutes to the top of the hour. The Swaziland, a Swati human rights lawyer by the name of Thulani Maseko was murdered. He's not just a human rights lawyer. He's a human rights lawyer that was actively involved in the pro-democracy movement in Swaziland. What does this mean? Has the pro-democracy movement once again been thwarted by the monopoly of violence by the monarch, King Mswati? And is there any room at all for democracy talks to once again come back onto the table? Mark Haywood is an editor at Maverick Citizen, joins us. Mark, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Why is the death of human rights lawyer Thulani Maseko significant?
Good evening, Oliver. It's significant for a number of reasons. Its first significance is that Thulani was a wonderful man, committed, humane, kind, and had been a human rights lawyer in Swaziland for close on 20 years. He's a very well-known lawyer, not just well-known in Swaziland, but known, in fact, throughout the world. Respected, has been called upon to assist with human rights issues in other parts of countries of Southern Africa. So for the king, and I say the king deliberately, to have had the brazenness to instigate the assassination of somebody as prominent as Thulani really shows that he thinks that he has impunity, that he is completely beyond the rule of law. You know, just the day before, in fact, the afternoon before Thulani was killed at 9 o'clock last Saturday evening. The king had made a kind of statement threatening activists, saying that you complain about mercenaries, but you are the people who've started all of the trouble in this country. But you know what the king and the authorities seem to forget is that the people who are protesting in Swaziland are protesting simply for democracy, simply for basic human rights. They are doing so peacefully. They are doing so within the very limited space that the law allows in that country, and yet they are being met with assassination, with repression, and with detention.
Is this once again a thwarting of democracy talks, both in Swaziland and as well as in SADC region? Because I can imagine that this would send chills through the spine of pro-democracy activists.
Well, it does send chills through the spines of pro-democracy activists. You know, pro-democracy activists in that country at the moment are very scared. They're not just scared, I mean, they're more scared after the murder of Thulani, but they were scared before because there are many people in prison at the moment. People are being disappeared. They are literally disappearing. Other prominent activists have been killed, including in recent weeks. So there's a climate of fear. But, the conditions are so desperate, 60% of people living below the poverty line in the country, that people are pushed continually back into a situation where they have to protest, because it's protest or die in a certain sense. Now, you may remember, or listeners may remember, that there was a big surge in protests in June 2021 that led to the deaths of 100 protesters gunned down by Swazi police and the Defense Force. That led to a process that was meant to lead to a national dialogue for democracy. And it is this national dialogue that the king has been continually stalling. Ironically, I think that given the outrage following Thulani's death, Swaziland's neighbors, including South Africa, and the SADC, the Southern African Development Community, are probably insisting that dialogue be put back on track again.
What evidence, by the way, I think we need to start here, is there that this was an extrajudicial killing?
Well, I was just talking literally 10 minutes ago to Thulani's brother. Thulani was a very prominent lawyer. He lived in a rural area about half an hour outside Mbabane, off the main road, down a dirt road in his homestead. It wasn't a robbery. The people who shot him through a window whilst he was watching television with his wife and children. There was no other motive. They then rushed away, drove away very, very fast. I'll report some circumstances that we've learnt about that in a day or two. And so that fits with the pattern of assassinations that is taking place. And it fits with, as I've described, this reign of terror. So, of course, we can't yet say, here's the evidence, but there is mounting evidence. And the United Nations, SADC, other governments have all said that there should be a completely independent, internationally supervised inquiry into this murder.
President Ramaphosa intervened in 2021, November thereof, during the ongoing protests that were happening and ongoing killings that were happening in Swaziland. Why has nothing come of since that meeting?
Well, you're right. First of all, President Ramaphosa did intervene. He intervened in his capacity as the chair of what's known as the SADC Troika on defense and security, and he's the chairperson of that. He made one visit to Swaziland and then disappeared, and the SADC Troika disappeared. And so the people of Swaziland were left once again without protection and very vulnerable. And I'll say this, which is that I think that, in some ways we all have a culpability in South Africa, because this little country that is almost completely surrounded by our country, apart from a small border with Mozambique, is a country that we've kind of turned our backs on, that the values, the principles that we stand for in South Africa, that our constitution protects, we seem to be accepting that across a border, 3 hours drive from where I'm speaking this evening, you enter a country where there is torture and assassination is the norm, rather than human rights and rule of law.
There are arguments that King Mswati has his hand in every industry sector and business that's prominent in the country, and that the country's economy is his economy in his personal capacity, and that economic sanctions would hurt him very significantly, and that's what the geopolitical partners need to consider. What's the feeling on the ground within Swaziland by activists and pro-democracy activists in particular about the potential of sanctions?
Activists and pro-democracy activists would like to see targeted sanctions against the king. They would like to see travel restrictions. They would like to see freezing of overseas assets. They would like to see foreign governments in SADC, in the European Union, refusing to do business with the king unless He introduces democratic reforms. There's no question that that is the situation. You know, the people of Swaziland couldn't get much worse off than they are at this moment in time. The king is said to be worth $200 million in a country where 60% of people live below the poverty line. That's how extreme it is. And of course, his wealth is wealth that he steals from the people of Swaziland, and which he steals from the government of Swaziland. Well, he doesn't need to steal it because, as you say, the government is his government, so he takes what he wants.
And then just finally, should there then be sanctions, do you anticipate that will make the king more open to democracy negotiations?
I can't say whether it would make him more open. He's clearly very stubborn, resistant to reason. He's obviously got a very great deal to lose. He's caused tremendous harm and hurt to the population of that country. The people in that country are not against the monarchy in principle. They're happy with the constitutional monarchy. It's part of tradition, it's part of culture, but they have no faith in the king of that country.
Good evening.
My apologies. Yeah, you can go ahead.
No, I was just saying, but I do believe that symbolically, if nothing else, it would be important for peace and freedom-loving governments and peoples from around the world to say that this is intolerable, and we won't have any truck with it.
Mark Haywood, thank you so much for your time this evening. Really do appreciate it. Mark Haywood, editor of Maverick Citizen. That brings us to the end of the show. Really, really do appreciate it. From our live streaming team, myself, Phineas, as well as Lisero, it's been a great evening. Back with you next week here on This Week Today. Have a fantastic and safe weekend. Cheers.
Independent and impartial. This is SAfm News.
The top stories this hour. The Premier congratulates the new Joburg mayor, and the Tanzanian national killed in Ukraine is back home. A very good evening. Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi has congratulated Al-Jama's Tapelo Ahmad on his election as Joburg mayor. Ahmad won with 138 votes